December 6, 1917. In Halifax's busy harbour, families and dock workers carried out daily routines under the shadow of war. Minutes later, two ships, the Mont Blanc, loaded with explosives, and the Emo, collided, unleashing the biggest non-nuclear blast in history. How could a single, everyday morning become an apocalypse that would change a city and maritime safety forever? The answer begins before the first mistake. Halifax Harbour in December 1917 was the engine room of the Allied war effort in the North Atlantic. At first light, steam whistles signaled the start of another day. Cargo ships, troop transports, and supply vessels crowded the waterfront, each slotting into a schedule that ran around the clock. Patrol boats crisscrossed the Narrows, watching for enemy submarines and ensuring that no vessel moved without clearance. On the piers, crews loaded ammunition, food, and medical supplies bound for Europe. The rising tide brought a surge of departures, with convoys assembling in Bedford Basin before setting out into the open Atlantic. Every channel, dock, and anchorage was in use, turning the harbour into a living map of wartime logistics. In this dense, carefully choreographed flow, even a small miscalculation could ripple outward, altering the fate of an entire city. Rows of wooden houses pressed close to the harbour, their windows glowing with the warmth of kitchen stoves. In the north end, narrow streets filled quickly. Children hurried along icy sidewalks, their boots crunching in the morning frost. Mothers bundled infants against the December chill, pausing to chat with neighbors or wave at passing carts. Men in heavy coats and flat caps moved toward the docks, lunch pails swinging, ready for another day's shift in the warehouses or aboard the ships that crowded the piers. Steam from the rail yard drifted over rooftops, mixing with the smells of coal and sea. Boarding houses and corner stores bustled as families and workers started their routines. In these tightly packed neighborhoods, every window faced the water. The city's daily life unfolded within sight and sound of the harbour, never guessing how closely their fate was tied to the ships moving through the Narrows that morning. At the heart of the harbour, two pilots faced a problem that rules alone could not solve. Francis Mackey, guiding Mont Blanc, steered for the Dartmouth side in line with the left-to-left passing rule, standard for ships meeting in the Narrows. William Hayes, aboard Emo, found his path blocked by a tug and edged to starboard, pushing Emo closer to the center of the channel. Each captain relied on his own reading of the situation, but neither could predict the other's next move. Communication broke down in a language of whistle blasts. Mont Blanc gave a single long blast, a signal of intent to keep right. Emo answered with two short blasts, a signal of refusal that claimed the same course. The exchange repeated, urgency rising. 5 sharp blasts from Mont Blanc warned of immediate danger, but by then the gap had vanished. Both ships slowed to nearly walking speed, engines ordered astern, but the inertia of thousands of tons could not be undone in seconds. At 8:45 in the morning, Emo's bow struck Mont Blanc's starboard side. The impact ruptured barrels of benzol stored on Mont Blanc's deck. Vapors spilled out, invisible but deadly, as metal scraped against metal. Sparks flashed. In moments, fire raced across the deck. The pilot's choices, shaped by habit, pressure, and imperfect signals, had set in motion a disaster that could no longer be stopped. Mont Blanc drifted toward the Halifax shoreline, flames racing across her deck. The ship's manifest was a catalogue of destruction: 250 tons of TNT, 2,367 tons of picric acid, 62 tons of gun cotton, and 246 tons of benzol. The collision had ruptured the benzol barrels, spreading a slick of fuel that vaporized in the cold morning air. Within moments, the vapors caught fire, feeding an inferno that burned hotter and brighter with every second. Crew members, knowing what lay below deck, abandoned ship and shouted warnings as they ran. But the fire drew crowds instead of scattering them. Dock workers, residents, and children pressed closer, curious about the blazing vessel. On the railway line just blocks away, dispatcher Vincent Coleman grasped the danger. A passenger train from St. John was minutes from entering the city, its route passing directly beside the burning Mont Blanc. Coleman tapped out a message on the telegraph that read, "Hold up the train. Munitions ship on fire, approaching Pier 6. Goodbye." His warning flashed up the line, buying precious seconds for hundreds of lives. 19 minutes ticked by as the fire worked its way toward the heart of the cargo. Each moment, the city's fate hung in the balance, the clock counting down to a force no one on shore could imagine. At 9:04 in the morning, the burning Mont Blanc vanished in a single, blinding instant. A fireball 300 meters wide swallowed the ship and vaporized the harbor water beneath it. The blast released an energy equal to nearly 3,000 tons of TNT, shattering the core of Halifax in less than a second. Pressure raced outward at the speed of sound, crushing buildings, splintering trees, and hurling glass and debris through the air. 2.5 square kilometers of the city's north end were flattened, entire streets erased, houses reduced to kindling, windows shattered up to 80 kilometers away. Fragments of Mont Blanc rained across the region. Her half-ton anchor landed more than 3 kilometers inland, a jagged piece of steel embedded in the earth as silent proof of the blast's reach. The shockwave tossed rail cars from their tracks and lifted people off their feet. In the harbor, a wall of water surged outward, flooding the devastated shoreline. For those nearby, there was no warning, only the sudden collapse of the world around them. In the span of a heartbeat, Halifax was transformed from a working port into a wasteland of smoke, fire, and silence. Silence. As the fires burned out and the shockwave's echo faded, survivors staggered through streets blanketed in debris and silence. The city's north end, once alive with families and workers, was now a maze of ruins. Every step revealed new losses: homes splintered, schools collapsed, familiar faces missing. Rescue efforts began with bare hands, as neighbors dug for loved ones and strangers shared coats against the cold. Blizzard. By nightfall, a heavy snow began to fall. The blizzard swept in from the Atlantic, turning the wreckage into a frozen wasteland. Temperatures dropped below freezing, and fierce winds drove snow into open wounds, making it nearly impossible to find or help the injured. Makeshift hospitals overflowed, morgues ran out of space and turned to the bitter cold to preserve the dead. Relief. Word of the disaster raced down the telegraph lines. In Boston, doctors and nurses assembled supplies before midnight. The first relief train battled snowdrifts and blocked tracks, arriving in Halifax in less than 24 hours after the explosion. In the face of devastation and winter's cruelty, help arrived from across borders, carrying hope to a city that had lost nearly everything. In the wake of devastation, Halifax became a proving ground for new rules and hard-won lessons. Maritime authorities rewrote the book on harbour safety, mandating strict traffic control and standardized communication between ships. Every vessel carrying explosives now faced mandatory hazard labeling and detailed cargo manifests, a direct response to the confusion and silence that had allowed disaster to unfold. International shipping codes soon followed, echoing Halifax reforms in ports around the world. Urban planners rebuilt the shattered North End with fireproof materials and wider streets. The Hydrostone district, designed as a model of resilience, rose from the ruins, offering survivors not just shelter but a vision of safer city living. Memory became part of the city's architecture, too. Each December, bells toll at 9:04 a.m., and names are read aloud at memorials across Halifax. These moments keep the lost firmly remembered. The city's gratitude for help in its darkest hour endures in a tradition that stretches beyond borders. Every winter, Nova Scotia sends a Christmas tree to Boston, a living symbol of the bond forged in crisis and the promise that even amid destruction, communities can rebuild and remember together. Today, Halifax's harbour is safer, its protocols shaped by lessons paid for in lives. Yet, every busy port still depends on human judgment. As global shipping surges, the smallest error can spark disaster. Memory is not just tribute, it is the guardrail against repeating catastrophe.